So, methods of prevention or solutions for this violence in football, then. Again, some of these methods of prevention can be considered for both player violence and spectator violence, while some are specific to players or specific to spectators. So, whilst we've just spoken about alcohol consumption and the effect that it has on spectator violence, alcohol consumption limits could be a method of prevention for that spectator violence. Obviously, that is specific to spectator violence, as players cannot be under the influence of alcohol whilst playing. So, obviously, like I mentioned, whilst at games, alcohol is served in stadiums. I don't believe there is a limit. There's no breathalyzers or anything, so spectators cannot be tested on the amount of alcohol they have consumed. Therefore, they can pretty much buy and consume as much alcohol as they would like, putting them under the influence of alcohol, under extreme influences of alcohol, and increasing the likeliness of spectator violence. So by having alcohol consumption limits, you are reducing the amount of alcohol that spectators can consume, and therefore reducing the likeliness of spectator violence, as they are under a lesser influence by that alcohol. Obviously, completely getting rid of alcohol in stadiums and the selling of alcohol in stadiums could be seen as a massive positive, as it means that none of the spectators are going to be increasing their influence of alcohol in the stadium, and they're going to be without that influence of alcohol, meaning violence is less likely. This obviously doesn't mean that they're going to be under no influence at all, because they can also drink before the game. There's no way of stopping them from doing that. But by completely getting rid of that, it does have a knock-on effect with the sport, I suppose, in a way, because it means that the companies working there have less of a financial income from selling that alcohol. So alcohol, obviously, it's never seen as a good thing. There's positives and negatives to it. Obviously, I guess it's part of the culture, and it's going to be near impossible to completely eradicate it from the sport, because it would cause major uproar by a majority of spectators. So by just having alcohol consumption limits, it's kind of a compromise in a way. You're allowing alcohol consumption, but you're limiting how much they can drink to make the sport safer. No, you can either do this, or perhaps you can limit the amount of alcohol that spectators can drink beforehand, before a game. You might have them do a breathalyzer test before entering a stadium. It sounds silly that you'd have to breathalyze everyone, but it could be a really effective method of reducing the amount of alcohol consumption and reducing the influence of alcohol, and as a knock-on effect, reducing spectator violence. So as an overall for that, obviously, alcohol consumption limits is a key point for preventing spectator violence, or at least reducing it, due to the nature of alcohol being such an influential factor on spectator violence. So another obvious method of prevention is policing. It's a shame that such high numbers of police are involved in football nowadays, but I suppose it's a necessary action with recent events in football, and with the history of football, with spectator violence, issues such as racism and things like that. Police have to be involved. It's a shame it is that way, but it's just the way things have evolved with football, and the controls that need to be in place for things such as spectator violence. So obviously, perhaps having more police at games which are likely to have increased numbers of spectator violence, so that might be international games where different cultures are likely to clash, or this might be, like previously mentioned, local rivalries. Um, so obviously increasing the number of police officers around the stadium and in the stadium would hopefully deter people from participating in spectator violence initially in the first place, due to the police being there and the likeliness of there being interventions by the police. But also it means that controls are in place and the police can control situations if they do get out of hand and if spectator violence does occur. So moving on from that then, perhaps linked in with police, I suppose, CCTV could be put in place. Now, obviously, there are CCTV in certain areas of stadiums, but perhaps more CCTV on spectators. By having CCTV on stands and outside the stadium, also, you're again putting in a deterrent, as people know they'll be caught on CCTV, but also meaning that you're able to punish more people for spectator violence, as you are able to track who committed those offences and punish them as a result of those offences. I suppose in football, the introduction of VAR is almost a form of CCTV in itself, for players at least anyway. You can have those video replays of fouls and tackles and incidences on the pitch and see how severe certain offences by players are. You can analyse situations or fights that break out on the pitch and see who was at fault, and how harsh their punishment should be, whether it's a yellow card, a red card, a fine, a longer ban, depending on the offence, of course. So I suppose through VAR you almost have a sense of CCTV already. I suppose a really important factor is also club action. So whether that's the coaches themselves, maybe they will substitute a player instantly if they begin to act with violence, or whether this is the officials acting on things more quickly or having stricter rules. Obviously, the rules aren't down to the officials, they just enforce the rules. So maybe rule changes need to be in place as well, surrounding the limitations and boundaries of tackles. How far can a tackle go? How rough can a tackle be before it results in a yellow card? Maybe there needs to be more of a discussion in that area, with the FA. Perhaps punishments need to be harsher. So maybe bans, so players will get banned if they act with violence on the pitch. Maybe these bans need to be longer. Maybe the players need more time to think about their actions, and the consequences of their actions need to be harsher, for them to feel it more and for them to think about their actions and to prevent them from acting that way again and acting with violence again. Perhaps the fines need to be larger. Players these days, men's players anyway, professionals, they earn millions through playing football, yet they are only fined in the thousands, for acting with violence. Maybe these fines need to be larger for them to feel the effect of it more. It needs to make more of a dent on their well-being, I suppose, on their financial well-being, at least anyway, for them to actually realise how important it is for them to act positively instead of acting with violence on the pitch. This is the responsibility of the club. It's the responsibility of the club to have these fines and bans increased, both the clubs and the governing bodies and the league itself, so the Premier League, they need to work in coordination with each other really to solidify the importance of abiding by the rules and not acting with violence. They need to work in coordination to have sufficient punishments, larger fines and larger bans, so that players learn from their actions and have larger consequences to their actions, so that they think about it more and are less likely to repeat their actions in the future and less likely to act with violence in the future. And of course, the same could be said for spectator violence. It's the responsibility of the club really to punish spectators for acts of violence. Often spectators will sometimes get banned, but they will be short bans because obviously the clubs want to make more money. They want the spectators to be paying for tickets. These bans need to be longer. The acts of violence should not be allowed amongst spectators, and I personally feel that a method of prevention would be lifetime bans for spectators if they act with violence. It would certainly deter a lot of individuals from acting with violence in the stands. Perhaps fans need to be fined as well, not just bans. Maybe fines need to occur. Obviously, if you're banned from stadiums, you can still watch the football at home. Maybe spectators need to be fined for them to realise the actual implications of their actions as well. Obviously, the list of methods of prevention or the list of solutions to this could go on. There are so many different ways that we can change this culture of violence within football, whether that's through education, whether that's through punishment, whether that's through catching individuals and punishing them, whether that's through rule changes. There are so many different ways to combat violence in football. Whether it's part of the culture or not, it's something that should not be tolerated. It is a real issue in the sport and something that causes a lot of danger and causes a bad reputation for the sport. It's a clear cultural issue because sports such as rugby have the same physicality, if not more physicality, where you would imagine that violence occurs more. However, you see that players respect their officials. You see that players only show aggression and violence within the rules of the sport. You rarely see violence beyond that, and you rarely see as much spectator violence, at least anyway. It seems to be a cultural thing within football, whether that's because of where it's derived from, or whether that's due to the culture of alcohol being involved in football. It's a clear issue within the sport specifically, and something that needs to be addressed and something that needs to be changed through these methods of prevention.